The dog interrupted the funeral, barking loudly at the casket. When a man questioned the reason, the priest grew visibly nervous. This man would soon uncover a shocking secret. It was a cloudy day, and the sky seemed as sorrowful as everyone present at Hannah's funeral. Silence enveloped the mourners as they stood in solemn reflection. Some held handkerchiefs, while others, their eyes filled with tears, clung to cherished memories of happier times with Hannah. The soft wind rustled through the trees, as if nature itself was paying tribute to her life. Suddenly, the silence was broken by an unexpected sound. Duke, Hannah's loyal dog, began barking incessantly. Duke wasn't just any dog. He had been Hannah's inseparable companion. Now, standing before the casket, he fixed his intense gaze on it, his barking growing louder and more insistent. People exchanged uneasy glances, whispering, "What is he seeing?" Some fidgeted anxiously, but no one could look away. Duke was no ordinary dog. His intelligence and sensitivity were legendary in the village. Even children, who loved to hear tales of Duke's remarkable intuition, now shivered as they remembered eerie stories about dogs sensing things beyond human perception. The question hung heavy in the air. What was Duke trying to communicate? His behavior unsettled even the adults, though none dared to voice their thoughts aloud. Duke's gaze never wavered, and his posture conveyed an undeniable urgency. Several adults approached cautiously, hoping to calm Duke, but he refused to be pacified. His barking continued unabated, his eyes locked on the casket. There was something in his unwavering determination that made even the most skeptical pause. Curiosity rippled through the mourners, and a tense energy filled the room. Everyone wanted to know what Duke was trying to reveal. Father Michael, standing at the front near the casket, noticed the shift in attention. Every eye was now fixed on him and the dog. Taking a deep breath, the priest attempted to settle the crowd, gesturing for silence. Yet Duke's barking persisted. Smiling nervously, the priest approached the dog, speaking in a soothing tone. "Come now, Duke. Calm down. Everything is fine here." But Duke would not be calmed. He pulled away from the priest's outstretched hand and let out a low growl, his eyes never leaving the casket. Beads of sweat formed on Father Michael's brow as he wiped his forehead, clearly uneasy under the scrutiny of the crowd. "It's just a dog," he said with a forced laugh, trying to redirect focus to the ceremony. Yet, even he seemed rattled, as though he feared Duke was onto something. Observing the priest's discomfort, an elderly woman leaned toward her companion and whispered, "Does he know something?" Her friend nodded, casting a suspicious glance at Father Michael. Others began to feel a strange chill, as though an invisible presence loomed in the air. Children, now more intrigued than frightened, clung tightly to their parents. Finally, the priest raised his voice. "Please, someone take the dog outside." But Duke wouldn't budge. He remained steadfast, barking at the casket with relentless determination, as if trying to convey an urgent message. The mystery deepened, and unease spread among the mourners. In the midst of this growing tension, a man who seemed out of place stepped forward. His name was David, a recent arrival to the village. Though he hadn't known Hannah well, he had developed a quiet admiration for her. David, with his observant nature and a passion for solving mysteries, felt something was amiss. He rose slowly, adjusted his coat, and walked toward Duke. The room fell silent, every eye following his every move. Crouching beside the dog, David spoke softly. "Hello, little friend. What are you trying to show us?" Hearing David's calm and gentle voice, Duke stopped barking for a moment, his intense gaze shifting to assess the man before him. Duke's eyes shone with intelligence and a mix of fear and hope, as if pleading for help. David noticed the intensity of the dog's gaze and turned his attention to the same direction, toward the casket. A chill ran down his spine, as though an invisible force was urging him to uncover the truth. The murmurs among the congregation grew louder, a wave of confusion and intrigue spreading through the room. "Leave the dog alone," one of the men said, stepping forward as if to interrupt. David shook his head firmly. "I think Duke is trying to tell us something. he replied, his voice calm but resolute. Fixing his gaze on the casket, he added, "And maybe we should listen." Without hesitation, David knelt closer to Duke. Speaking in a low tone, he encouraged, "Come on, boy. Show me what's bothering you." Duke wagged his tail faintly, a sign of trust, as though he understood David's intentions. The barking stopped, replaced by a series of sharp sniffs as Duke began moving cautiously toward the casket. Each step he took felt deliberate, as if guiding David toward a secret only he could sense. The congregation fell into uneasy whispers, recalling stories about animals with uncanny instincts, dogs and cats sensing danger, presences, or even the supernatural before humans could perceive anything. Duke's behavior unsettled everyone, casting an eerie shadow over the room. David voiced what many were thinking. Perhaps Duke was perceiving something beyond human understanding. The tension thickened, and unspoken questions weighed on everyone's mind. Could Duke be seeing something supernatural? Or was there a deeper, darker mystery behind Hannah's death? Father Michael, visibly unnerved, straightened his cassock and stepped into the center of the room. Raising his hands, he called for silence. "Please, everyone, calm down," he urged, his voice straining for authority but tinged with unease. "We are here to pay our final respects to Hannah, someone so dear to all of us." His eyes darted toward David, who remained kneeling beside Duke. The priest's voice grew louder, sharp with reproach. "It is inappropriate for anyone to disrupt this sacred moment with such commotion," he continued. Some in the crowd nodded in agreement, but others exchanged wary glances. Why was Father Michael so agitated? Why was he so determined to stifle this moment? Pointing directly at David, the priest declared, "What you're doing is a disrespect to Hannah. Leave that dog alone and stop distracting everyone with this foolishness." Despite the weight of the priest's words, David remained steadfast. Something in the priest's urgency, his almost desperate need to quell the situation, only deepened David's suspicions. Beside him, Duke let out a low growl, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. The priest flinched but pressed on, his tone shifting to near pleading. "Please, everyone," he implored. "Let us honor Hannah's memory without this spectacle. Let us return to our purpose here, to pray for her soul and her eternal peace." But peace felt farther away with every passing moment. The priest's words were filled with concern, yet his trembling hands and the sheen of sweat on his forehead told a different story. The room grew silent again, heavy with anticipation. All eyes turned to David, waiting for his next move. David rose slowly, his resolve unshaken. He could feel the weight of the crowd's curiosity and the priest's desperate attempts to regain control. After a pause, he spoke, his voice firm and unwavering. "Father Michael," David began, his gaze piercing, "how exactly did Hannah die?" A collective gasp rippled through the room, and chaos erupted. The murmurs grew louder, some people exchanging shocked glances, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The boldness of David's question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Father Michael's eyes widened in alarm. His face paled, and for a moment he seemed unable to respond. The weight of the question pressed down on him, and everyone in the church held their breath, waiting for his answer. Father Michael had already told everyone that Hannah had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Yet David's question echoed through the church like a stone cast into a serene lake, creating ripples of uncertainty. "What do you mean? How did she die?" The priest replied, his voice sharp and defensive. "I found her myself in her bed. She passed in peace, sleeping. She died in her sleep," he repeated, his tone faltering as though trying to convince himself as much as the crowd. David, undeterred, took a step forward. "But why was Hannah alone? And why were you the first to find her? Doesn't that seem a bit strange to you?" The murmur among the congregation grew louder. Unease mixed with curiosity spread through the air. Wide-eyed children clutched their parents' hands, sensing the tension, though they didn't fully understand. Adults whispered in hushed tones, their words feeding the charged atmosphere. Father Michael's face turned crimson, and a flicker of anger overtook his features. Stamping his foot, he silenced the crowd. "This is absurd," he exclaimed, his voice nearing a shout. "You are causing an uproar during a sacred moment, disrespecting the memory of a beloved woman." Pointing a trembling finger at David, the priest commanded, "Leave here immediately. You and that dog. This nonsense will not be tolerated any longer." His words rang with authority, but there was a perceptible edge of nervousness in every syllable. David hesitated briefly, but beside him, Duke let out a loud, defiant bark as though challenging the priest and urging David to continue. The sound spurred David on, solidifying his resolve. The priest's desperation was undeniable, and David could sense that he was brushing against a truth the priest didn't want exposed. Realizing he couldn't press further at that moment, David slowly turned. Gripping Duke's collar, he cast one final, piercing look at Father Michael before heading toward the door. Behind him, murmurs rippled through the congregation, their voices a mix of confusion, suspicion, and shock at what had just transpired. Outside the church, David felt the weight of the community's stares. Though he had left the building, he hadn't abandoned his quest. The dark mystery surrounding Hannah's death gnawed at him. A strong premonition told him that he and Duke were far from finished. Duke wagged his tail, his body language filled with determination, as if he shared David's sense of purpose. "Come on, buddy," David whispered, patting Duke's side. "We got a lot to uncover." Together, they ventured into the cemetery, weaving through trees and weathered gravestones. The cold wind stirred the leaves, creating a sound that resembled faint whispers. The stillness of the graveyard only deepened David's certainty. Something was hidden here. Duke sniffed the ground intently, driven by an almost supernatural intuition. He moved with purpose, leading David toward an unseen destination. Determined to follow the trail, David concluded that the first step was to learn more about Hannah's life. Their path led them to Hannah's home, a modest stone cottage on the edge of the forest. Overgrown vines and a neglected garden framed the house, giving it an air of abandonment. David found the door ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. The sight stirred more questions than answers. Stepping inside, a chill ran down David's spine. The interior was coated in a fine layer of dust, yet several objects appeared to have been moved recently. Duke sniffed around with heightened energy as David began his search. He rummaged through drawers, opened cupboards, and sifted through old papers and documents. On a small, weathered table, he discovered a wooden box. Inside were letters and photographs, yellowed with age. As he read through the letters, David uncovered a web of secrets. Hannah had written about clandestine meetings and cryptic conversations with people from outside the village. Then David's breath caught. One letter stood out. It was handwritten by Hannah and mentioned Father Michael directly. In it, she revealed that she had uncovered disturbing truths about the priest. David's pulse quickened as he glanced at Duke. The dog shifted restlessly, as if sensing the gravity of the discovery. Driven to continue, David searched further and found a small key taped to the back of an old picture frame. "What does this open?" he murmured. Duke barked sharply, as though encouraging him to press on. Next to the key was a photograph. In it, Hannah stood beside Father Michael in front of the church. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but David's eyes were drawn to a detail in the background, a small metal box partially visible at the base of the church steps. David's heart raced as he remembered the letter. Hannah had written about a metal box, mentioning that Father Michael had hidden money inside it. The puzzle pieces were beginning to align, and David knew he was on the verge of uncovering something far more sinister than he had imagined. "We're on the right track, Duke," David whispered, stroking the dog's head. "If Hannah was trying to tell us something about the priest, maybe this key is the answer." Determined, David held the small key tightly in his hand. With Duke faithfully by his side, he felt closer than ever to the truth. Now, he just had to uncover what Father Michael was hiding, even if it meant searching every corner of the village. David turned his gaze to the calm streets of the village, but beneath that tranquility, he sensed an undercurrent of something darker. The answers were here, buried in the secrets Hannah had left behind. The town library was his next stop. It was an old building, filled with shelves of dusty books and documents that seemed to whisper forgotten stories. David combed through the materials, searching for any thread that might tie Hannah and Father Michael to something unusual. After some time, he stumbled upon an old photo album of the town. Flipping through its pages, David saw pictures of community events and religious festivals, until his eyes stopped on a photo of Hannah. She was standing beside Father Michael. Her expression struck David. She didn't look happy. Instead, there was unease in her eyes, almost fear. "What did you know, Hannah?" David murmured. Then he noticed it, a small metal box, barely visible at the edge of the photograph. It was the same box he had seen in the picture at Hannah's house. Driven by curiosity, David returned to her home. The clues were falling into place, and he felt a growing urgency to see it through. Back at the house, he searched every inch. Behind an old curtain, he discovered a hidden cabinet. Inside was a notebook, Hannah's diary. With Duke by his side, David flipped through its pages. Each word painted a chilling picture. Hannah had uncovered corruption within the church. She wrote of Father Michael embezzling money from the congregation, using people's trust to hide his crimes. "He's stealing from everyone," Hannah had written, her words sharp and urgent. "Using their faith to cover up his sins." Tucked inside the diary was an envelope filled with photographs. David examined them carefully. In several, Father Michael was in secret locations within the church, always with the same small metal box. One photo in particular caught David's attention. Father Michael stood beside an old statue inside the church, the box positioned at its base, as if he were concealing something. A chill ran down David's spine. "So that's it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She found out everything. That's why she was in danger." Duke let out a soft whine, sensing David's tension. "We have to find that box," David said, standing up with renewed resolve. "It holds a key to everything." With Hannah's diary clutched in his hands, David felt the weight of her revelations. Each word was a burden, urging him to uncover the truth. The narrow streets of the village stretched before him as he and Duke made their way back to the church. Every step amplified his adrenaline and determination. He knew the answers were hidden within those sacred walls. The church loomed in the distance, its doors slightly ajar. Shadows stretched across the interior, wrapping the space in an eerie silence. David entered cautiously, Duke close at his heels. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on the statue in the corner. It was the same statue from the photograph, a stone figure with a stern gaze, as though guarding a secret. Kneeling, David began to feel around the statue's base, his hands trembling with anticipation. Finally, his fingers brushed against something. Moving aside a small piece of fabric, David revealed the metal box, just as Hannah had described in her diary. His heart raced as he exchanged a look with Duke, whose wagging tail seemed to say, "We're on the right track." The box was heavy in his hands, its surface cold and unyielding. What lay inside could change everything. "Here we go, buddy," David said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "Let's find out the truth." David held the box tightly, its cold, heavy surface grounding him in the moment. Slowly, he lifted the lid, and what he saw made him catch his breath. Bundles of money were neatly rolled up and labeled with the names of congregation members, each marked as a donation or tithe. But that wasn't all. Beneath the money lay a small, unassuming key. David picked it up, holding it to the light that filtered softly through the church's stained glass windows. "A key," he murmured thoughtfully, his mind racing. "But what does it open?" His question hung in the air as his eyes fell on a yellowed piece of paper folded and tucked beneath the bundles of money. Carefully, he unfolded it, revealing a hand-drawn map. At the center, a location was circled in red ink with the words "Church Storage" written beside it. David's chest tightened. This must be where Hannah discovered something important. With the key in one hand and the map in the other, he looked at Duke. The dog's alert gaze seemed to mirror David's determination. "Let's go, boy," David said, his voice steady. "We need to find that storage." They moved cautiously through the church, following the map's directions. The building grew eerily silent, as though it were holding its breath, the air thick with anticipation. The map led them to a small, inconspicuous door hidden behind the altar, so discreet that it was easy to imagine few had ever noticed it. A chill ran through David as he approached, the air around him colder, heavier, laden with an oppressive energy. He inserted the key into the rusted lock and turned it with a trembling hand. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. David clicked on his flashlight, its beam flickering as he took his first cautious step downward. Duke followed closely, his ears swiveling at every faint sound. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a damp corridor, its walls slick with moisture. The faint sound of chains clinking echoed through the passage, sending a shiver up David's spine. "Hannah," he called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The only reply was the echo of his own voice. The corridor opened into a small, dimly lit room, illuminated by a single bulb that swung gently from the ceiling. At the center of the room sat Hannah, chained to a chair. Her pale face turned toward him, her eyes weak but filled with recognition. "David," she breathed, relief softening her voice. "Hannah!" he exclaimed, rushing forward. But before he could reach her, heavy footsteps thundered behind him. David spun around to face Father Michael, who stood in the doorway gripping a heavy wooden plank. His eyes burned with rage, his face twisted in a way that David could scarcely recognize. "You shouldn't be here," the priest shouted, his voice reverberating off the stone walls. "I told you. You would never find her." Before David could react, Father Michael lunged, swinging the plank with all his might. David barely dodged the blow, but it grazed his shoulder, knocking him off balance and sending him sprawling to the ground. Dazed, David raised his hands defensively, his mind reeling. How could a man of faith, a supposed shepherd of goodness, descend into such violence? The priest advanced, raising the plank again for another strike, but Duke let out a ferocious bark and leapt into action. With incredible force, the dog sank his teeth into the priest's leg, eliciting a piercing scream that echoed through the room. Father Michael staggered, flailing desperately to dislodge Duke, but the dog held firm, growling and tugging with unrelenting determination. The plank clattered to the ground as the priest, limping and frantic, tried to escape. David scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging. "You're not getting away," he shouted, his voice resolute. With Duke still snapping at Father Michael's heels, they chased him out of the church and into the open street. The commotion had already drawn villagers from their homes, and shocked faces turned toward the spectacle. The sight of the revered priest, disheveled and limping, being pursued by David and Duke, sent a wave of murmurs through the crowd. Father Michael stumbled, falling to his knees as Duke growled menacingly a few feet away. David seized the moment, stepping forward to confront him. "This man has betrayed all of you." David's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "He's stolen your trust, your faith, and worse." The villagers gasped, their murmurs growing louder as they processed the unfolding scene. Duke stood tall by David's side, a steadfast guardian in the face of the crowd's mounting tension. David raised his voice, commanding attention. "Stop! Everyone needs to hear what really happened. Everyone needs to know the truth." His words echoed, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. The priest struggled desperately, trying to free himself, but David pressed on. He quickly unveiled the shocking truths: the stolen money hidden in the box, Hannah's kidnapping, and Father Michael's long-concealed crimes. The villagers froze, their faces painted with disbelief as the weight of the revelation sank in. Desperation overtook Father Michael. He twisted and fought to escape, but Duke held him firm. Seeing the struggle, a few villagers stepped forward, their hands steady as they restrained the priest. With Father Michael subdued, David knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. He led the group back to the church, his hands trembling as he pried open the metal box. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the sight of the embezzled money and a map detailing a secret storage location, a damning piece of evidence tying the priest to his illicit activities. The truth, undeniable and inescapable, lay bare before them. Determined to uncover everything, David led the villagers to the hidden storage room. There, huddled and still shaken, was Hannah. Relief swept over her face as the door opened. Duke, sensing the success of his mission, wagged his tail proudly. With Hannah safe and Father Michael restrained, the villagers stood in stunned silence, processing the gravity of the betrayal. Yet David remained wary. He knew the priest was not a man to surrender easily. As the villagers debated the next steps, Father Michael, driven by desperation, seized an opportunity. A flicker of malice crossed his face as he broke free from his captors. Grabbing a heavy piece of wood, he turned toward David, his eyes alight with rage. "You understand nothing. You never should have interfered," he bellowed, his voice dripping with venom. David froze, his mind reeling as the priest charged at him, the wooden plank raised high. For a split second, he was paralyzed, unable to believe the scene before him. But Duke reacted without hesitation. With a powerful leap, the dog clamped his jaws on Father Michael's leg, ripping a pained scream from the man. The priest collapsed, thrashing wildly as Duke held firm. Snapping out of his stupor, David rushed to help, pulling at the priest. A fierce struggle ensued, their shouts and Duke's barks filling the air. In a final act of desperation, Father Michael wrenched himself free, staggering toward the village square, his gait uneven from the injury. Duke, undeterred, pursued him with relentless determination. The priest barely made it a few steps before Duke lunged again, this time pinning him to the ground in the center of the square. Villagers gathered around, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and outrage. To see a man they once revered now exposed and humiliated was surreal. Catching his breath, David stepped forward. With the crowd hanging onto his every word, he began to recount the full story, each detail striking the villagers like a hammer. The secrets, the lies, and the courage it took to uncover them were now laid bare, ensuring that no one could ever forget the truth. David explained that Hannah had uncovered Father Michael's betrayal. He had been embezzling the congregation's donations, using the money for secret and nefarious purposes. David also revealed the chilling truth, how the priest had orchestrated Hannah's kidnapping to silence her before she could expose him. The villagers, stunned by what they were hearing, joined together to restrain Father Michael as David pressed forward, determined to prove his accusations. Leading them back to the church, David carried the small metal box, feeling the immense weight of its contents and the gravity of the truth it held. In front of everyone, he opened the box, revealing neatly organized stacks of money, each labeled with the names of the faithful who had donated. Gasps rippled through the crowd as whispers spread like wildfire. The proof of the priest's deceit was undeniable. David then held up the key he had found and explained its significance. It unlocked a secret storage room within the church. With the villagers trailing behind him, he led them to the hidden chamber. There, they found Hannah, frail but alive, chained and trembling. Relief swept through the crowd, followed by outrage at the sight of her captivity. Hannah's expression shifted from fear to gratitude as her eyes met David's, and Duke rushed to her side, wagging his tail with uncontainable joy. The heartwarming scene moved everyone, their emotions palpable as they realized the gravity of what had been uncovered. Despite being exposed, Father Michael attempted to justify his actions, spouting excuses in desperation. But the villagers, once loyal and trusting, had heard enough. The man they had revered as a moral compass stood revealed as a fraud, and his words carried no weight. The evidence was irrefutable, and the community's collective gaze turned cold, severing the bond of trust they had once shared with him. As the police arrived to take Father Michael into custody, the village began to process the shock of the betrayal. Their once sacred trust had been shattered, but they now saw the opportunity to rebuild on a foundation of truth and transparency. Hannah, overwhelmed with gratitude, thanked David and Duke for their courage and sacrifice. She recounted her ordeal, her voice filled with relief and determination, ensuring the truth would never again be hidden. In the days that followed, the village came together, united by the hard-earned revelations. David, having risked everything to uncover the truth, decided to stay. He became a pillar of the community, helping Hannah heal and finding a renewed sense of purpose among the people he had saved. His bravery and friendship inspired others, and his presence became an integral part of the village's future. Duke, the loyal and heroic dog, became a local legend. Children gathered around him, showering him with affection, while adults praised his unwavering courage. The villagers celebrated Duke as a true hero, recognizing his pivotal role in exposing the darkness and protecting the innocent. Together, the community found a new beginning, strengthened by sacrifice and bound by a commitment to honesty and justice. With renewed hope and resilience, they transformed their village into a place of integrity, determined never to let deception take root again.